Hi, I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater. Thanks for joining us today. We've got some fun stuff for you to check out. Origin Effects is here. We've got all the pedals, or most of the pedals, lined up. And this is John Dines, the product manager. It's great to have you here.
Nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. First time in the U.S.
Indeed. Yeah, loving it so far.
Yeah?
Yeah, having a great time.
We're glad you're here and enjoying some of the winter weather as well while you're
glad to be here.
So man, product manager, tell us, what is that? What do you do for Origin Effects?
I guess I help take ideas for products, turn them into finished products, work on specifications, and make sure that people like you and all our other dealers and customers know exactly what they are and exactly why they're great.
Well, that's got to be fun.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's brought me over here, so I can't complain.
Right. Getting some travel in out of the deal even, yeah. So I assume you're a guitar player. I heard you playing on a bass a little bit earlier as well.
Yeah, a bit of both. I mean, you've got to be a bit versatile because we have quite a versatile range of things, but
right.
Yeah,
right.
Try and keep up to speed.
Yeah, that's awesome. So how long have you been with the company?
Just over a year now, so I'm still pretty green, but I'm settling in, getting the hang of it all.
Right. So the company dates back to 2012, correct? Or actually even a little bit before that.
2012 was the first official product release, which was the old big format SlideRIG compressor. But shortly before then, Simon Keats, the Origin founder, was he was wrestling with a URI 1176 compressor repair, and he actually had two of them, and was kind of chasing his favourite slide guitar tone, which was the Lowell George from Little Feat, kind of clean, sustaining thing, which was achieved by running those two compressors in series. And he sort of had a bit of a light bulb moment of, there's not a pedal that does this. So he sort of set about putting that right, and here we are. Right,
right. So that first pedal was the Cali76?
The first one was the SlideRIG, and the Cali76 followed shortly after, which was the same thing, but just with a single 1176 based compressor stage in it, with the full set of controls that you'd find on the original studio unit. So now we kind of shrunk the kids, and they're a bit more manageable in pedalboard real estate. But it's the same circuitry, same sounds, same UK build quality. It's all there.
Right. So it's that same 1176 style approach. The SlideRIG has two.
SlideRIG has two. There's also the Cali76 Stacked Edition, which is our latest dual stage compressor, which gives you a bit more control over the attack and release times of the two stages. It really lets you kind of have a bit more versatility out of the tone, instead of sort of compromising between having a nice snappy punchy compressor or fattening up the sound. You have both at once, and it also has this immense sustain that we call clean overdrive.
Right. Yeah.
It feels like you're playing a high gain lead sound, but it's completely clean. It's got to be experienced, really.
It is fantastic. I just bought one for myself actually a couple weeks ago, so I've got a stack now on my board as well. And man, it is, you're absolutely right. And what I love about it is you can kind of play with the two sides of it, with the attack and the release, and really dial it in, whether you want more of a funky kind of a thing, more percussion, or you want it really to, like you say, have almost infinite sustain.
It's got a lot of range in it, but it doesn't kind of get in the way. You never feel like you're being kind of run over by the thing. It's very musical.
Right.
And it's adaptable too, as you said, yeah.
Yeah. So is it basically the same circuit as a slide, but it's got the extra controls in there?
It's the same principle, although depending on which parameters you want more control over is going to govern the choice between the two pedals. The SlideRIG doesn't give you quite as much control over the attack and release, but what it does is lets you have a lot more control over the signal routing, so you can blend the two stages between running in series or in parallel or anywhere in between. The rest of it's preset to be a bit more appropriate for slide guitar, and it just is an instant button for that sound.
Right. So the other pedals, I want to talk about the modulation pedals, but the other pedals everyone points to with Origin, of course, are the RevivalDRIVes, the whole family there, and the whole, well, tell us a little bit about that and the amplifier relationship with those.
Well, the thing with that is kind of the same as the Cali76 stuff. It's just applied to tube amps. So instead of recreating a classic compressor in a pedal, it's recreating a classic tube amp. And the best way to do that is to literally build the entire circuit in miniature using solid state components. So if we're going for power amp overdrive, we build a little push-pull output stage with its own reactive load. And if we're trying to get the ghost tones of an old amp struggling power supply, we build mains hum and sag into the pedal, and it's all there. And that's why it's so versatile, because as you mess with the controls, you're messing with the very sort of circuit elements that define the characteristics of those old amps that we all know and love.
So do you recommend them with those that you run those into a totally clean amplifier, or do you usually run them into an overdriven tube amp?
Well, what I just described was the starting point, but then as that developed, we found ways to accommodate all of those uses. So they are essentially, well, we call them analog amp recreations, because they kind of go an extra step beyond what a lot of pedals do and recreate all of that behavior. But you can use them with a clean amp or a flat power amp or an amp that's a bit on the edge. It just depends how you set everything. There's the post-drive EQ, which is there to essentially tailor the output of the pedal to cancel out the voicing of your amp. So if you're running into the front of a black panel Fender or an old Marshall or something, you can adapt the sound of the pedal so you don't have to compromise your clean tone. And with the blend control on there as well, you can add in a bit of that clean signal to help it sit better with a slightly overdriven amp tone. But you can just switch all of that off and go straight into a flat power amp or an impulse response cabinet simulator. And then it's just like having a proper fire-breathing tube amp sitting on a dummy load.
Right, right. We were emailing before you came over this way, and I have a RevivalDRIVE that I just love it, and that post EQ is so powerful because it allows you to really shape the harmonics on the top. And like you said, Match, if you got a bright amplifier, you can roll back some of the highs on the overdrive and get a smoother tone while still having your bright clean, so it makes it super versatile.
Yeah, it's actually voiced quite specifically to kind of do the opposite of the go-to settings that people use on these classic types of amps that I mentioned. So yeah, you really can kind of make your own amp disappear and replace it with that without having to just kind of fiddle around trying to get that balance that frustrates a lot of people.
Right. So now you now have the full-size RevivalDRIVE, but there's also the compact pedals. What's the difference with the compacts?
Well, it's just, like I said, you're sort of, when you're using the RevivalDRIVE, you're really designing your own amp. The compact just makes a couple of those design decisions for you. It doesn't have the ghosting, and it's just a single channel version of that circuit with a bit of a easier to navigate layout, because it's nice to have all of that control, but for some people it's a bit daunting, so the compacts just kind of cut to the chase.
Right. And there are several different flavors. So there's the original, there's hot rod. What's the difference there?
Well, the thing with the hot rod one is once you design a pedal that behaves just like a real tube amp, you can mod it like a real tube amp as well. So that's our sort of tip of the hat to these famous 70s and 80s amp techs that modded the amps of famous players who, when they were in search of more gain and more aggression and stuff like that. So we started with the RevivalDRIVE Compact and did exactly that. More gain, more sustain, more aggression, but because it's still based on that essentially non-master volume amp topology, it still has all the range of a vintage amp, and it does it very convincingly.
Right. So I have to ask, so Simon Keats, the founder of the company, I assume designs the pedals and is kind of the man behind the circuits and things, and at least the concepts of what's going in there?
Well, we've got a bit of a bigger team than he had back in the day.
Sure.
He's the ideas guy, and then it doesn't get past everybody else until it's right. So lots and lots and lots of testing. Right. That's the main thing.
Does he have an electronics background? Does he have an amplifier background? How did he get into this this side of things?
Well, I think when he was a teenager, he was just doing it as a hobby, but getting into this stuff inspired him to go and get an electronics degree, and then before you know it, he was working for Focusrite and for Vox and really learning his way around everything to a really high standard. And then, yeah, went off to do his own thing.
Right, nice, nice. So continuing on through the line, modulation pedals are fairly new to the lineup, and you've got two different versions. What are the two modulation? I'm pointing at these like I can see what they are. We have two modulation pedals. Tell us about those.
Well, they're not just modulation pedals. They are, again, recreations of amps with modulation. So it's not just the bias tremolo of the Fender Brown Deluxe in the Deluxe 61, and it's not just the pitch shifting vibrato of the Magnatone 200 series in the Magnum 57. It's the whole amp. And those amps had great clean sounds and great overdrive sounds, and the way that those sounds merge with the modulation is what's really great about them, and you have to recreate the whole circuit to get that.
Right. And they're very different sounds, aren't they?
They are very different, and certainly very different to the RevivalDRIVE stuff as well, which kind of tends to go after the big amp thing, the plexis and twin reverbs and things, whereas the two with the modulation are really retro small combos, and they can be very polite or they can be very rude. And it's all good.
They have a different type of power amp breakup in those that you're getting with those drives.
Definitely, yeah. It's that sort of small tubes, less negative feedback, just a bit more of an unruly type of character to them.
Right.
But it can be just a thing, especially for kind of Americana sounds and dirtier blues and things like that.
Yeah, right, right. Unruly, I like that.
Yeah, that's what they don't have to be, but they can.
Right. I love it. I love it. And the newest pedals, if I'm not mistaken, are the bass pedals.
They are indeed, yeah, and it's the same principle. It's the analog amp recreation technology that we've used in the other pedals, but this time we're recreating classic bass amps. So they're in two flavours. There's the BassRIG Super Vintage, which is our take on the Ampeg SVT, which I'm sure your viewers will know. It's sort of the world's favourite bass amp, and it was the first kind of purpose-built high-powered amp, and it took the world by storm, and it's still in huge demand, and the BassRIG Super Vintage just gets all of those great sounds in a pedal. The 64 black panel, on the other hand, is our tip of the hat to the old sort of mid-60s black panel Fenders that, although not specifically bass amps, they were chosen by a lot of bass players for their high power and scooped fat sorts of tones. It's a mixture between showman and bassman circuits, and you can even set it to sound a bit more like a tweed Fender. It kind of covers the whole range of those pre-bass amps.
Right.
They've both got cabinet simulated DI outputs with an analog cabinet simulator. The Super Vintage is an 810 and the 64 black panels are 2x15, and it's just a kind of one-stop shop for an entire bass amp tone.
Right. Having hauled a few 8x10 cabinets and 300-watt SVTs, it's much easier to move the vintage pedal.
Well, I wouldn't have got an 810 on the plane to get over here.
So do you find that guitar players are also using those pedals to get some of their tones?
Well, they're only just released, so nobody's really using them yet. I wouldn't rule it out. It's not exactly what they're designed for, but like I say, with the certainly with the 64 black panel, these amps were guitar amps too, so I'm sure they'll work great.
Right, right. And I know those have just come out, so you're probably heaving a sigh of relief and also working very hard to get the word out about those. So is there more on the horizon? Can we look for more coming from Origin?
There's always something on the horizon. I can't tell you what it is yet, but I can tell you you'll definitely like it.
Oh, awesome. We can't wait. We can't wait. John, thanks so much for making the trip over from the UK. I know we're keeping you busy for a couple days while you're here. You're demoing pedals for sales engineers. You're doing some meetings, and you got lots going on.
Indeed, yeah. It's been great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Well, it's our pleasure. Thanks again for coming in, and safe travels home. Hope you enjoy your time in the U.S.
Thank you very much.
Great to see you.
Cheers.
And thank you for joining me. I'm Mitch Gallagher from Sweetwater.